The face-peeling aliens of Peru. Folkloric fear with a shocking twist. In the dense, mist-shrouded jungles of northeastern Peru, where the Amazon rainforest stretches beyond the reach of modern civilization, a remote indigenous village became the epicenter of a terrifying mystery. For weeks in early 2023, the Iquitu people spoke of nightmarish encounters with beings that seemed to emerge from another world. Tall, otherworldly creatures with massive heads and glowing yellow eyes that stalked the darkness, inspiring fear that spread far beyond their isolated community. This is the story of the face-peeling aliens of Peru, a tale where ancient folklore collided with modern fears, culminating in a revelation more disturbing than any extraterrestrial explanation. The first whispers of terror. The village sits nestled along the banks of the Nene River, accessible only by boat and surrounded by the impenetrable green walls of the Amazon. Here, disconnected from the digital world that connects most of humanity, the Iquitu people maintain traditions that have sustained them for generations. Their isolation has preserved a way of life increasingly rare in our interconnected world. But in early 2023, this same isolation transformed their village into a perfect stage for unimaginable horror. It began with whispers, unusual sounds in the jungle at night, different from the familiar cacophony of insects, birds, and mammals that typically filled the darkness. Villagers reported seeing shadows moving against the natural patterns of the forest, silhouettes too tall and oddly proportioned to be human. These initial sightings might have been dismissed as imagination or misidentification, common enough in the play of moonlight through dense foliage. But what followed could not be so easily explained away. As February stretched into March, multiple villagers reported direct encounters with beings they described as standing over 7 feet tall, with disproportionately large heads and eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow in the darkness. Most disturbing was the report that these entities could somehow remove or peel their faces, revealing something underneath that was too horrible to describe. The creatures moved with an unnatural grace, sometimes appearing to float above the ground rather than walk upon it. The Night of Yellow Eyes. On what would later be referred to as the Night of Yellow Eyes, the village experienced its most concentrated wave of sightings. Multiple families reported seeing the tall beings moving between houses, their forms silhouetted against the night sky. Children cried in terror as yellow lights appeared at windows and doorways, too high off the ground to be human observers. One elderly villager described watching in horror as one of the beings approached his home, its movements jerky and mechanical, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. The terror reached its peak when a 15-year-old girl named Elena ventured briefly outside her family's hut to retrieve water. According to her account, given through tears to village elders the following morning, she was grabbed from behind by something with hands like ice. She felt a sharp pain across her neck before breaking free and running back to safety. When examined by her family, she had a long, thin cut across her throat, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but impossible for her to have inflicted upon herself. "It tried to take my face," Elena insisted, trembling as she recounted her experience. "It wanted to wear my skin." Village under siege. Within days, the entire village of approximately 200 people had effectively placed themselves under a self-imposed curfew. No one ventured out after dark. Families crowded together in single rooms, keeping fires burning throughout the night. Hunting parties, essential for bringing food to the community, refused to travel far from the village and returned well before sunset. The psychological impact was devastating. Children couldn't sleep, adults grew exhausted from maintaining constant vigilance, and the community's normal functioning ground to a halt. Several men from the village, determined to protect their families, organized a nighttime patrol armed with machetes and the few hunting rifles available. On their third night, they reported a chilling encounter. According to their account, they spotted 3 of the tall beings standing perfectly still at the jungle's edge, watching the village. When the men approached, shouting and brandishing their weapons, the creatures retreated into the darkness with unnatural speed. Most disturbing was the patrol's claim that the beings appeared to be wearing some kind of armor, One man described it as shiny, like the Green Goblin from Spider-Man, a reference he knew from a rare visit to a city cinema years earlier. Ancient fears in modern form. As news of the encounters gradually reached neighboring communities through boat traffic along the river, anthropologists familiar with the region recognized elements of the descriptions. The concept of face-stealing or skin-stealing entities exists in various forms across indigenous mythologies of the Amazon basin. The Iquitu specifically have an ancient folktale about Los Pelacaras, literally the face peelers, forest spirits who punish those who take more resources than they need by stealing their identities. But something about these encounters seemed different from traditional folklore. The descriptions contained oddly modern elements, the references to armor, the mechanical movements, the floating above ground. When a local radio station in the nearest town broadcast a segment about the alien encounters, the story took on new dimensions, incorporating elements of global UFO mythology that would traditionally have been foreign to the isolated Iquitu worldview. As the story spread, it transformed. What began as terrifying but localized encounters soon became the Peruvian alien invasion on social media and in international tabloids. Ufologists and paranormal enthusiasts began making plans to visit the region, while skeptics dismissed the entire affair as mass hysteria or an elaborate hoax. The Peruvian authorities, initially reluctant to devote resources to investigating what they viewed as superstition, finally decided to intervene when tourism officials expressed concern about the story's impact on the region's reputation. The investigation begins. A team consisting of police officers, a medical doctor, and a cultural anthropologist familiar with the Iquitu people arrived in the village in early April 2023. They found a community transformed by fear. Many families had temporarily abandoned their homes to stay with relatives in more populated areas. Those who remained appeared exhausted and traumatized. The team documented the villagers' accounts, examined Elena's now healing neck wound, and began methodically searching the surrounding forest for evidence. What they found surprised even the most skeptical members of the investigation team. Approximately 2 kilometers from the village, in a previously undisturbed section of jungle, they discovered signs of recent activity. Unusual foot patterns in the soft earth that didn't match standard hiking boots, small areas where the undergrowth had been cleared, and most significantly, traces of chemical compounds not naturally occurring in the environment. Most telling was the discovery of small metal fragments that appeared to be parts of sophisticated equipment, components that had no business being in this remote location. The fragments were collected and sent to a laboratory in Lima for analysis. The investigation team expanded their search perimeter, now accompanied by several Iquitu men who knew the terrain intimately. What they found next would transform the entire narrative. The shocking truth revealed. Hidden deep in the jungle, accessible only via a carefully concealed path, they discovered an abandoned temporary camp. It contained evidence of recent occupation, food wrappers with modern packaging, battery-powered equipment, and most significantly, specialized gear including damaged jetpack-like devices and helmets with unusual modifications. The analysis of materials from both sites revealed something no one had anticipated. The aliens terrorizing the Iquitu village were human, illegal gold miners using sophisticated equipment to operate in the remote region. The miners had been using small, portable jetpacks to traverse difficult terrain quickly, explaining the reports of floating beings. Their helmets, designed for nighttime operation, included enhanced vision capabilities with yellow-tinted lenses that would glow when catching any ambient light. The disproportionately large heads described by villagers were these same helmets, which extended beyond normal human proportions to accommodate equipment. The armor was protective gear used during mining operations. The purpose of terrorizing the village became clear through further investigation. The miners, likely connected to criminal networks operating between Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, were exploiting gold deposits in protected indigenous territories. By creating fear among the Iquitu, effectively weaponizing their cultural belief in Los Pelacaras, they hoped to drive the villagers away from the area temporarily, allowing unrestricted access to the valuable resources. The attack on Elena appeared to be a deliberate escalation of this intimidation strategy. The aftermath: when authorities presented their findings to the villagers, the reactions were mixed. Some expressed relief that the threat was human rather than supernatural, while others felt a different kind of fear, knowing that organized criminal elements had specifically targeted their community. Elena's family demanded justice, but the miners themselves had disappeared, likely tipped off about the investigation by contacts in nearby river communities. The Peruvian government increased police presence in the region temporarily and promised to implement better protections for indigenous territories against illegal mining operations. However, the remoteness of the area and the valuable resources beneath the soil mean that such promises often remain unfulfilled in practice. For the Iquitu people, the experience has left lasting impacts. Their traditional stories of Los Pelacaras have now merged with this modern experience, creating a new chapter in their cultural mythology. The villagers speak of the false face peelers, humans who borrowed the identity of ancient spirits for their own gain. Some elders see this as a corruption of traditional beliefs that requires spiritual healing for the community. The story of the face-peeling aliens of Peru reveals something profound about the intersection of isolated cultures with the modern world. What began as a terrifying mystery that seemed to validate ancient folklore instead exposed a very human darkness: the exploitation of indigenous fears and beliefs as a tool for resource theft and territorial control. In many ways, this reality is more disturbing than any extraterrestrial explanation could have been. As we seek to understand mysterious encounters and unexplained phenomena, the case of the Iquitu village reminds us that the truth may lie not in the stars, but in the complex, often troubling dynamics of human greed, exploitation, and the vulnerable communities caught in between. Sometimes the monsters we fear from beyond turn out to be all too human, wearing technological masks instead of alien faces.